And now for something completely different.
Hello and welcome in. It's the Get Cocky Podcast. I'm your host, Pearson Fowler. You can catch me Wednesdays on ACP with Chris Clark and Wes Mitchell, and also every weekday at noon on 107.5 The Game. Got a great podcast for you guys today. Before we get into a Missouri preview with former Carolina quarterback Perry Orth, I want to remind y'all to rate, review, subscribe to the podcast if you like it and you want us to keep doing it. Also share it with your friends. That is the best way to support the podcast. And while you're there, don't forget to check out the other podcasts from the Gamecock Central Podcast Network, another Carolina podcast. We call that ACP. You know, if you're cool, you can call it ACP. And don't miss Chris and Wes's emergency commit cast following Rico Powers' commitment to the Gamecocks earlier this week. They're going to be doing that for all commitments for South Carolina going forward. So that's great. Don't forget to check that out. And again, subscribe so you get all the notifications whenever a new pod goes up on the Gamecock Central Podcast Network. All right, Carolina is headed to Columbia, Missouri, or what apparently people in Missouri call Como. I didn't know that was a thing, but it is, and I guess it's actually kind of cool, so I'll probably start calling it Como if I remember. But anyway, this is their first true road test of the season so far, and I've had way more trouble trying to figure out how this game is going to pan out than any of the other three games this year. Although maybe I shouldn't say that because I ended up being so completely wrong and feeling like Carolina was going to easily cover that -12 in the season opener. But honestly, the game wasn't so far from what I was expecting in terms of the X's and O's. The difference was just that Sam Howell was a lot better than I expected. Jake Bentley was a lot worse than I expected. And the offensive play calling was more limited/conservative than expected. So yeah, I guess I'll just chalk that one up as a big L. But this Missouri game, I really, truly, I don't have a feel. I don't even know where to start. They're in year two of a new offensive coordinator in Derek Dooley, who seems like he wants to play quicker and sort of a more spread attack than what they've looked like the last couple of years with Drew Lock, you know, being able to stretch the field vertically and things like that. They got less vertical passing right now, which makes sense given Bryant's skill set. Kelly Bryant, their new quarterback, transferred from Clemson, but I'm still unsure about his ability to operate a high-powered offense, you know, just running it that way, and especially if they're not going to be running him more than he has through the first couple games of the season. He's carried 19 times for 53 yards in their first three games. That's if you take out the sacks and the sack yardage, and that's not at all what I was expecting, given that he ran the ball 173 times in 2017, which was his last full season as a starter. 173 carries. But if that Wyoming game, the season opener, which Missouri did lose, and that was in Wyoming, which apparently it's hard to play at altitude, whatever. If that Wyoming game is any indication, Derek Dooley won't have any problem calling Bryant's number a few more times in the run game, or maybe Bryant will just end up calling his own number, because that ended up being a close game. They were obviously trailing. They went on to lose the game. 9 of his 19 carries this season came in that game, so maybe you can expect a little bit more of that if it's kind of a close game. For Carolina, you obviously need to watch out for that, but I think Bryant finishing the game with 16 to 20 carries would probably be good news for the Gamecocks. Not only would that probably be an indication that it was a close game where Missouri was trailing or had a slim lead for most of it, but I think it would also be taking carries away from Larry Roundtree. He and Tyler Beatty have really been splitting the carries pretty evenly this year, but Beatty's still definitely more of the change of pace, catch the ball out of the backfield guy. It's a Roundtree that you're worried about more running between the tackles, and that should be the number one priority for Carolina, is making Missouri one-dimensional and slowing those two guys, but especially Roundtree, down between the tackles. Put the ball in Kelly Bryant's hands and let him win the game, either with his legs or throwing it down the field or whatever, but he needs to be the guy to beat Carolina. That's got to be the game plan. The one caveat to that strategy of just allowing Missouri to kind of dink and dunk and play what may end up looking like a similar game plan to Alabama, where they're not, like I said, throwing the ball down the field. It's a lot of slants, it's a lot of RPOs, quick reads, quick decisions, quick throws, things like that. The one caveat is that if tackling ends up being an issue on Saturday, and I know I'm just even mentioning that, alluding to that is probably triggering most of you listening, but I feel like some of the issues with missed tackles, at least this past Saturday, were kind of overblown. If you haven't heard by now, the stat that has sort of been circulating around Gamecock Twitter the last half of this week has been that Alabama actually had more missed tackles statistically than Carolina did on Saturday. And 3 of those for Carolina were on that one really terrible / awesome play, depending on which side of the fence you're on there with the Carolina-Alabama game. But 3 of those were in one play. So that leaves you with either 6 or 7, depending on which metric you're looking at, missed tackles for Carolina. And it was 13 for Alabama. Now, I'm not saying that the defensive issues in general are overblown. I'm just specifically talking about the tackling. The safety play has been bad and needs to be better. And tackling angles more than like tackling execution, I think, is what really needs to improve. Some of the big plays that were busted on Saturday weren't necessarily because an Alabama player had a juke or broke a tackle or whatever, but because there wasn't even a Carolina player around to make the tackle, you look at that Ruggs touchdown, nobody really touched him, so it wasn't officially a broken tackle, but it was poor angles. And that's a huge problem. It has to get better. I guess the good news this week is that Missouri doesn't have the horses to do to Carolina what Alabama just did, but that's, again, going to be their game plan to try and attack and exploit that weakness for Carolina. Can they do it with less playmaking sort of remains to be seen. Now, I think I've probably expressed different opinions on ACP and on my local show that I'm about to hear, so sorry for contradicting myself maybe as many as 3 times this week, but I hope that just speaks to how inscrutable I found this game to be. But I think Carolina should be able to win the game if they score 35 points, given how I've now convinced myself this game is going to go offensively for Missouri. So the question is, can the offense score 35 points? Yes. Probably. And Carolina's scoring 38 points a game, but only 21.5 against FBS schools, 20 against North Carolina, 23 against Alabama. And if you say, was Alabama 13 points better defensively than Missouri, 2 touchdowns, or maybe say a touchdown better and assume that Carolina doesn't have all the unlucky breaks, wipe 2 touchdowns off the board, that's probably fair. That's not too much mental gymnastics to come to that conclusion. But Missouri's probably almost certainly not 15 points worse defensively than North Carolina. But that's the other part of why this is so hard. It almost feels like the North Carolina game now is irrelevant because of how different the offense is with Hilinski at the helm. So we have to decide how good Carolina's offense is based on one game against the worst team Carolina's played this decade, maybe even this century, and one other game against the best team in the country or the second best team in the country, whatever you want to call Alabama. Meanwhile, Missouri, they don't have the same range in terms of playing the best team in the country and the worst team of the decades. I mean, Southeastern Missouri State's bad, but they also play them every year. But playing at altitude and losing to a now 3-0 Wyoming team that also beat Idaho and Texas State doesn't really tell you much more than their week 2 drubbing of a West Virginia team that's 2-1 and just upset NC State last week. It's really hard. Again, it's not the same range, but those games still don't really tell you anything because we know so little about those opponents. And I think it's safe to say that we'll learn more about both of these teams, South Carolina and Missouri, in this game than any of each of their previous 3 games. And the other weird part about this is both fan bases seem pretty optimistic. I think projections on sort of the Missouri media and fan side of it are favoring Missouri and kind of the inverse here in Columbia. 9.5 is a really weird line. And the Carolina-Missouri games are always kind of weird, even before Missouri joined the SEC. I mean, you can talk about the Andrew Baggett game. There's the Monsoon game. There was the weird game when Missouri scored 2 touchdowns in the last 7 minutes to win 21-20. But even before Missouri joined the SEC, you go back to that 2005 Independence Bowl. I mean, that was a very bizarre game where Missouri outscored South Carolina 17-3 in the fourth quarter. So all that to say, I'm not making a pick for this. All I know is there's a lot riding on this game. It's very strange, and I truly have no inkling either way what the heck is going to happen on Saturday. But maybe Perry Orth can help us figure this thing out. So without further ado, it's time to go in the huddle with former South Carolina quarterback Perry Orth. All right, joining me on the other line now, former South Carolina quarterback, recent former South Carolina quarterback, Perry Orth. Perry, I really appreciate you taking some time to sit down with us this morning and give us your thoughts on an impressive early start from Ryan Hilinski and what's certainly going to be a bellwether game for South Carolina and maybe for Missouri this weekend in Columbia, Missouri.
Yeah, man, absolutely. Thanks for having me on. Ryan, I think he's impressed all of us. He's obviously a true freshman quarterback, but for him to play with the confidence that he's playing with, and always knew he had the ability, but whenever, kids are young and they have the ability to play at that level, you never truly know, are they going to be able to adapt to the speed of the game, or are they going to be okay when they get hit for the first time? How are they going to react in front of 80,000 people and they're playing on primetime TV? You just never know, and he has seized the moment. There's no question about it.
So are you surprised by how quickly he's been able to pick up the offense, and again, not even just the X's and O's, but the ability to command it confidently?
Not the offense. I think that's the easiest part about playing quarterback is memorizing the playbook. I think that the most impressive part for me is that he's adjusted to the speed of the game. I don't think people, because when you watch on TV or you're up in the stands, you don't really get a true justice of how fast everything moves and at the pace that it does. And so to see him play and be able to pick up on that as quickly as he has is the most impressive part. I think that playing quarterback, it really comes down to how fast you can make fast you can make your read and how quickly you can get the ball to your hand. And I saw a stat saying that he's leading the conference in getting the ball out of his hand as far as like from the time he catches the snap until the time he releases it. So I think that just speaks volumes of the kind of, the work ethic that he puts into it, but also, he's just a natural, instinctive quarterback. I think everyone will agree as he drops back and you can literally see him progressing through his reads. It was like he was born to play the position. So I'm really, really excited about his future here.
I'm glad you mentioned that stat about the quick release. I was wondering if you had seen that, and if you didn't, I was going to bring it up anyway. Do you happen to know how quickly, on average, you released the football when you were playing?
I think it was like 3 or 4 seconds, and so for some reason it always ended up in the other team's hands. So that's part of the reason why I'm selling insurance now and not playing football.
Oh, man. Don't undersell yourself, because you still got a great quarterback camp, too. You got a lot to teach the young quarterbacks as well.
Yeah, thanks, man. No, I think I was in somewhere between the 2 and 3, probably right around that standard offense. Now, I will say that playing under Spurrier in that type of system, that wasn't a West Coast get the ball to your hand quickly. That was you take time progressing through reads and different things like that. I'd be interested to see kind of where I stood. That's a cool little stat.
And you're right. It doesn't exactly just necessarily say, okay, you get the ball out of your hands more quickly. It makes you a better quarterback. I think last year, Tua, who we all know is a tremendous quarterback, was around 2.7 or 2.8 in terms of his average release. So what are the factors? You mentioned, just sort of the offensive scheme could be a factor, but is this just something that Hilinski is naturally good at, or is it something that Brian McClendon's asking him to do differently?
I think it's both. I think that Brian is asking Ryan to get the ball out of his hand quickly, because here's the thing, is that he is still a true freshman. You don't want a true freshman spending a lot of time in the drop back world. You want to get the ball out of his hand quick, get him confidence, get him in a rhythm of the game, but also you want to get the ball to your playmakers' hands in space. And that kind of West Coast type of offense is something that we've kind of adapted to. And then as we've seen, the first drive of each game, they've been real quick, short, precise passes. And then as the game progresses, then you can put Ryan, once he gets the confidence, into that drop back world. And I've really enjoyed watching him play in that drop back passing game where, he hits that 3-step drop and you can see him progressing through his reads, because he sees the field very well. And you can tell he doesn't lock in on one read and kind of get stuck on it. He plays through it, and it's really neat to watch, especially at his young age.
So going through the progressions, I think, is something that a lot of people don't pick up on because they don't know what it's like to go through the progressions themselves, so it's hard to tell when somebody else is doing. Is there anything else that's stood out to you from Hilinski that you think people at home that don't have the experience of being in the locker room, of sitting in the quarterback room, would necessarily pick up on, whether it's footwork or anything else?
Yeah, I think that probably his biggest improvement, in my opinion, that I've seen at least from the spring game or a few of the spring practices that I saw to now, is that his footwork, is how quick he actually is. He's not very fast, but he slides around the pocket. He's got great pocket awareness. He seems to really get in and out of, getting in those passing lanes. And he is 6'4", and he is a big kid, but sometimes, those big 6'5" offensive linemen, they're taller than you, so you can't really see over them. And he seems to just kind of find those lanes to throw the ball. And then kind of off the beaten path a little bit is what makes him special as a quarterback is he's a great leader, and he has that natural it factor about him, just his personality. It's very easygoing, but he brings almost like a calming presence. But he also brings kind of like a stern, hey, guys, I got this thing under control. Let's go ahead and play ball. And I think that's just something that you're naturally born with. And all I know is I'm glad he's a Gamecock. Yeah,
and there's no question. You've seen, and really the entire team, it's not just the offense. It seems to have carried over throughout the entire locker room. There's just a new energy ever since he took over, which I think is just a credit to him more than anything. But the emotional state of this team traveling to Missouri is going to be really interesting, because 2 weeks ago you have Hilinski's first start, so obviously there's a lot of excitement for that. Last week, if you don't get excited for the Alabama game, you don't have a pulse. So this is a little bit of a downgrade. You're going on the road for the first time. I'm very curious to see what this team looks like emotionally, and kind of what Ryan looks like in his first road start. Your first road start, if I remember correctly, was in Athens in 2015. Is that right?
Yeah, that happened to be my first career start. It was a great way to introduce me to college football. So,
wow. What do you remember from the week leading up to that game?
I just remember there was so much, for me personally, there was a lot of excitement, a lot of energy about the game. I was never really nervous until the day of the game. And I wouldn't say nervous as like I was scared, just kind of anxious to get out there and play ball. Obviously, now he's had, 2 starts and one against Alabama. So, I don't think he's gonna see anything much more difficult than playing a Nick Saban defense. But, it is different because it is on the road, and when you travel and you're throwing the ball in a different park and a different atmosphere and environment, it is different. But I think I wouldn't be shocked if you don't see any kind of hiccups or anything like that with him. I don't think him going on the road is going to affect him, but that's another thing you got to figure out because he is young and you just don't know. But I fully expect him to go out and kind of play at the same level that he has been, and I expect him to have a big game Saturday. Missouri last year was one of the worst pass defense teams in college football, and right now I think they're in the top 5. But I mean, they played Wyoming, who runs the ball every play, so you kind of gotta you take that with a grain of salt. So I'll be interested to see how he plays. I know Michael diced them up last year, and I'm hoping that Ryan can get after him again.
So do you feel like from an offensive game plan perspective, there's going to be more of an emphasis to have Ryan throw it early and often, short, completable passes to build his confidence? Or do you think it's a game where Carolina maybe leans a little bit more on the run, which Wyoming had success with, to set up Ryan passing and not ask him to do too much in his first road start?
No, I fully expect them to do exactly what they did versus Alabama. Get them out there, get the short passes going, get the offense flowing and going in the right direction. Because when you're completing those short passes and you're getting 7-8 yards every time you do that, then you can run that hurry up offense like they really want to run. That upbeat, up tempo offense where you get an 8-yard gain, you run up and run another play, then you run it, and then you hit a play action, and then now you take a shot for the end zone. And that seems to be where this team is at its best, is when they're getting the quarterback involved early, and then you can run the football from there. I think what we've seen is that they're kind of trying to open the run game up with the pass game. And so I think Saturday we're going to have that opportunity to do that. I'm really excited to see because, going on a broad topic here, you look at the Missouri game, and I've had this game circled on their schedule since the get-go. I thought this was going to be, after game 4, you kind of figure out what kind of team you got. We're going on the road against a good opponent. So I'm really, really interested for this game Saturday.
And it's a game that I really don't have much of a feeling one way or the other. Everything that you read coming out of Missouri seems like there is, respecting the opponent, but confident. People in Missouri think Missouri's going to win. People in Columbia think that South Carolina's going to win, and yet the line has stayed very solidly at 9.5. I've really had trouble making heads or tails of this game, but I do feel like Carolina's going to be able to move the ball. Who are, in your opinion, a couple of X factors that you think will decide the game for Carolina this weekend?
I think it starts in the secondary. We've got to play better. J.C. Horn is a guy that, we've been hearing now for 2 years in all camp about how he wanted to be, and he had the talent to be a top SEC corner, and he's got to shut them down. We've got to take away that pass offense that they have. I mean, I get like it was, I don't remember the team they played. Kelly Bryant threw for 400 plus last week and was really zinging the ball all over the field. And through the 3 games, our pass defense has not been what it was hyped up to be. And if we can find a way to slow that down, we're going to score points. I don't think that Missouri's defense is anything special. I think Ryan's going to pick up where he left off Saturday. Our run game looks fantastic. We got to slow them down because if we get into a shootout, you never want a true freshman on the road having to get into a shootout in his first road start. So, and then when you play in the SEC, you got to pack your defense on the road. And if you don't, you typically don't win. So my biggest player this weekend is probably JC.
Yeah, that secondary, it's so interesting because it seems like people have been very concerned about the defense, about missed tackles and things like that, and I think some of that has been overblown. But you look, and I think the defensive line has been better this year. I think the linebacking has been better this year. It's really just kind of those two safety positions, kind of the other corner and that nickel that have given Carolina trouble at times this year. It hasn't even necessarily been kind of a consistent thing, but also you're playing a guy in Tua, who's one of the best quarterbacks in the country. You're playing a guy in Sam Howell that you didn't have any tape on, and I think looked really, really good in his first start as a true freshman for North Carolina in the season opener. And I guess Kelly Bryant is a little bit of a different beast in terms of someone that can throw the ball and that can run it. He hasn't run it a ton, but one of the interesting stats from the Alabama game is Tua, his only 2 credited carries of the game were sacks. He actually didn't run it at all. So Carolina hadn't really overly had to deal with a mobile type guy. And I guess you got an up close look at Kelly Bryant when he was playing at Clemson in 2016, right?
Yeah, he I think he came in on some mop up duty and ran around a little bit. But yeah, he he's progressed as a passer. I was actually intrigued to see how well he's been playing so far this year. Because he kind of has that dual threat tag on him because he is a good athlete. But I tell you, they're keeping him in the pocket. But yeah, he does have that ability to scamper out and make some plays with his legs if you don't contain him. I think your best bet still is to keep him in the pocket and get pressure from the inside. And Javon's got the ability to do that. He had, just watching some plays and reruns of the game Saturday, man, he made himself some money dominating the interior of that Alabama offensive line. So we need him to have a big game because not only will he help clog up, running lanes, but, he was getting after the passer too. And we need him to step up big time on Saturday.
Yeah, he's kind of like the guy that I'm circling as the player of the week every week for the rest of the season for Carolina because he is just such a disruptive force. And you feel like they're starting to, a lot of those really good defenses that had NFL guys all over it, you're starting to see more of those guys pop up with Javon Kinlaw and J.C. Horn. And, how do some of these other young guys kind of pan out? Zach Pickens is still very young in his career, but clearly talented and has done a good job when he's gotten in somewhat limited action. So I think if you're a Carolina fan, for those people that, aren't so pessimistic that they already jumped ship after the North Carolina game and just aren't going to watch any more games for the end of the year, which I think is their loss. There are still a lot of things to be excited about on both sides of the ball for Carolina.
Yeah, there are. And here's the fact, man, is that we go out and you beat Missouri, which is a very winnable game. You beat Kentucky, winnable game. On paper, probably losing to Georgia, but you never know. Georgia's not world beaters. I mean, heck, man, we were a few plays here and there from giving Alabama all they could handle. And then you play Florida and A&M and Vanderbilt. I mean, you could still go out and win 8 games, easily, in my opinion. So you have to have that positive mindset if you're a fan. But it all revolves, in my opinion, on this game. You go out and drop this game and go to 1-3, and then you come back home at night playing a good Kentucky team, and you don't have a whole lot of confidence. We hadn't beat them in 5 years. And you hear the doubters start coming in, and you try to block it out, but as a player, you still hear them, and you're still thinking about them. So, there's a lot that we can be encouraged about this team and about this season still, but you drop this game, and things might get ugly.
Yeah, well, let's just hope that Monday we're not talking about that because that's sort of the darkest timeline here. But Perry, really appreciate you letting us take some of your time this morning and sharing some of your insights and your perspective, especially on Hilinski, because it's very valuable from a guy that understands the quarterbacking position as well as anybody around here, and that's why you actually have an awesome quarterback camp, QB1 Athletics. You want to tell us a little bit about that? Yeah,
man. So I appreciate you saying that. I started training high school and middle school quarterbacks about, I guess it would have been now 2 years and some change when I got done playing. And it's really been just such a blessing to be able to not only give back as far as teaching the kids how to throw the right way and getting kids fundamentally sound, but teaching them kind of the ins and outs of being a quarterback. Listen, I had such a roller coaster career. I've been QB1. I went from QB1 to QB3 in a week. And I've kind of had an interesting roller coaster of a career from playing and getting benched and then putting back in the game and then getting benched, So kind of teaching the mental side is something I take pride in because a lot of these kids understand, they're starting to understand what that's like, and to be able to, give that experiences or give and share my experiences with them is a great deal, man. So I've really enjoyed it.
And you mentioned sort of off the top just how important it is to have that emotional stability. And, even for guys that aren't necessarily natural leaders, there are still plenty of things to learn about leadership, just being a quarterback, and things that have made Hilinski successful, and I think are going to be a huge X factor for Carolina this week in Missouri. So that's a really, really important part of it, and I think something that people don't always think about. So if y'all want more information, go to QB1athletics.com, sign up for the camps. I know people that have done the camps personally and have said just amazing things about it, so be sure to go check that out. And thanks so much again for doing that and for taking some time for us this morning, Perry.
Appreciate it, man. Thanks for having me, and let's go get a W tomorrow.
Thanks again so much to Perry. Don't forget to check out QB1athletics.com for more information about his quarterback camps. That's going to do it for us here on the Get Cocky podcast until Monday. In the meantime, be sure to rate, review, subscribe, share this podcast with your friends if you like it and you want us to keep doing it. We'll be back on Monday, as will ACP. So much content going up right now on the Gamecock Central Podcast Network, and you don't want to miss any of it. Thank you all so much for listening. Enjoy the Missouri game. We'll be back on Monday.